Welcome to Pillowtime Lore, where dreams take shape and stories wrap around you like your favorite blanket. You've made it through the day, and now it's time to slow down, breathe deeply, and drift into a world made just for you. So, fluff up your pillow, snuggle into your coziest spot, and let your eyes get heavier with each word. This is your moment. No to-do lists, no noise, just stillness and a little magic. With each breath in, feel the tension melt from your shoulders. With each breath out, let go of everything that doesn't serve your peace. You're safe here. Tonight's story is soft and soothing, like a warm cup of tea for your thoughts, carefully crafted to calm your busy mind and help you drift gently into sleep. So close your eyes, dear dreamer. Let your imagination wander while I carry you into a land where anything is possible and everything ends in peace. This is Pillowtime Lore. Long ago, before time felt as heavy as it does today, there lived a creature not quite of this world, a mischievous goblin, clever and cruel, who took great delight in chaos and disorder. He wasn't wicked in the way villains are in grand epics, but petty and proud. He giggled when flowers wilted, snickered when people quarreled, and danced when good things fell apart. One day, in his icy tower, high above the clouds, the goblin created something he believed would be his greatest joke upon the world, the mirror. But this mirror wasn't like the one in your bedroom or the ones in shop windows. No, this mirror held dark magic. When someone looked into this mirror, their reflection twisted. Beauty looked ugly, kindness seemed weak, love looked foolish. The purest of hearts would see themselves and feel ashamed. The mirror only showed the worst in everything, and the goblin laughed and laughed at the mess it caused. The goblin and his fellow little creatures flew all over the earth with this mirror, showing it to people and reveling in the sorrow it sowed. Then, one day, high above the clouds, they tried to carry the mirror to heaven, hoping even the angels would see ugliness in themselves. But the higher they flew, the harder it became to hold and then crash. The mirror slipped from their icy claws and plummeted to the earth, shattering into a billion glittering pieces. Each shard, no larger than a snowflake, carried the same dark curse. Some were no bigger than grains of sand, but the worst part, these splinters didn't just lie on the ground. They floated, they flew, they found their way into people's hearts and eyes. A single shard in your eye, and you would only see the flaws in others. A piece in your heart, and you'd grow cold, angry, bitter, without even knowing why. Whole towns changed, friendships ended, lovers grew distant. The world felt a little frostier, and no one knew it was the mirror's fault. Far away from this storm of sorrow, in a quiet town where cobblestone paths met blooming gardens, the tale of the mirror was just an old forgotten whisper. Here, laughter still echoed in alleyways, and the scent of warm bread floated from every cottage window. In this peaceful place lived two dear children, Kai and Gerda. They weren't siblings, but they might as well have been. Their families lived next door, and between their windows ran a long flower box filled with Rosie's roses they had planted together. Every morning, they would lean out of their windows and greet one another with sleepy smiles and bright chatter. Their favorite spot in the world was the rooftop garden, where bees buzzed and the wind carried little songs from the trees. Kai would tell stories of ice kings and cloud ships, while Gerda listened wide-eyed, weaving crowns from wildflowers. But stories, no matter how sweet, can't stop a shard of cursed glass for one winter morning. As snowflakes drifted gently from the sky, a tiny sliver of that wicked mirror found its way into the town, and into Kai's heart. He didn't feel it at first, just a chill, a strange stillness, as if something had frozen deep inside him. Then, as he looked at Gerda, something shifted. Her smile, once radiant, now seemed silly. Her warmth, once comforting, felt irritating. He blinked, his eyes stung, and another shard slipped in. From that moment on, Kai began to change, but Gerda, soft-hearted and true, noticed only that her friend seemed colder, and she wrapped her scarf tighter and hoped spring would come soon. The winter that followed felt sharper than ever before. It wasn't just the cold air that bit at your cheeks, or the icy wind that rattled windows. It was something else, something Kai-shaped that had gone missing. Even though he was still there, he no longer met Gerda at the flower box. The roses they had planted wilted under snow, and Kai didn't seem to care. He stopped telling stories on the rooftop, and instead mocked the ones Gerda shared. His laughter, once warm and boyish, turned brittle like frozen leaves crunching under boots. Gerda tried not to cry. She told herself he was just tired, or sick, or maybe he missed the sun. She brought him warm bread, gave him her mittens, and reminded him of their summer games. But Kai would only shrug. "Fairy tales are for children," he'd scoff, "and you're too old to be playing with flowers." One icy afternoon, when snowflakes swirled like dancers in the wind, Kai took his little sled into the town square. It was a market day, and the streets buzzed with horse carts, bells, and bundled-up villagers. The older boys tied their sleds to passing carts, laughing as they were pulled through the snowy streets. Kai did the same, zipping through the lanes behind a hay cart, face flushed from the cold. Then it happened. A sleigh appeared, tall, gleaming white, and unlike anything they had seen before. It was pulled by snow-white horses, their manes glittering with frost. The sleigh was shaped like a swan, carved from ice and silver, and the woman who sat within it, she wore white from head to toe. But it wasn't the kind of white that made you think of clouds or cream or lace. No, this was winter's white, piercing, shimmering, alive. Her eyes were pale blue, like a frozen lake under moonlight, and when she looked at Kai, he felt that strange stillness, again cold and terrifyingly quiet inside. She smiled, a smile so perfect, so calm, that it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Would you like a ride, little boy?" she asked, her voice like snow falling on silence. Kai, enchanted, nodded. He climbed into her sleigh, and before anyone could stop them, they were gong-gliding through the streets, out of the village, and into the endless white beyond. The Snow Queen said little, but her magic crept around Kai like a velvet ribbon. The cold that had lived in his heart now pulsed with quiet joy. He didn't miss home. He didn't remember Gerda. He felt nothing, and it was peaceful back in the village. Gerda waited. The day passed. Then night. Kai never came back. The grown-ups whispered. He must have fallen into the river, or got lost in the woods. Maybe he ran away. They shook their heads and said, "Poor boy," then closed their shutters tight. But Gerda didn't believe any of it, not for a second. Something told her deep in the part of her heart that still felt summer warmth that he wasn't gone, just taken. And so, when spring returned and the snow began to melt, Gerda packed a little satchel, tied on her boots, kissed her grandmother goodbye, and went in search of her dearest friend. She didn't know where the Snow Queen's palace was. She didn't know how long the journey would take. But love, when true and bright, doesn't ask for maps. It simply begins. Spring unfolded like a storybook in Gerda's world. The snow melted into puddles that shimmered under sunshine, and the crocuses peeked through the thawing soil. But Gerda had no time to marvel. She had a mission. With her satchel, red shoes, and a heart full of stubborn hope, she stepped beyond the gate of her grandmother's cottage, whispering a promise. "I'll find you, Kai." The first place she went was the river. It had always been her secret friend, the one she talked to when she was sad, the one that carried fallen leaves and dreams downstream. She sat on the bank and asked, "Have you seen him, my Kai?" The water rippled as if thinking, then, gently, a little boat bumped against the reeds. No one was in it. No one had tied it there. Gerda blinked. Was this the river's answer? She stepped in. The current tugged at the boat like an excited dog, and before she could change her mind, the river carried her away, gliding softly through fields that smelled of waking earth and flowers. She passed under willow trees, through warm sunlight, and eventually into shadows. That's when she saw it, a little cottage nestled in a tangle of flowers. The roof was alive with blooming vines, and bees buzzed lazily in the golden air. A woman stood outside, stirring something in a copper pot, full of flowers, and had a kind face, but her eyes glimmered in a way that made Gerda pause. "Come, child," the woman called. "You look hungry." Gerda didn't argue. She stepped ashore and followed the woman inside, where the walls were lined with drying herbs, and the whole place smelled like lavender and honey. The woman made her soup, brushed her hair, and when Gerda told her about Kai, the woman smiled sweetly but said, "No boys here, dear. only flowers. Then, very gently, she touched Gerda's forehead with her fingers. Warmth bloomed, confusion followed. The days passed. Gerda forgot why she came, forgot who she was searching for. The flower witch bee, 'cause that's what she was, had cast a gentle spell. One meant to keep Gerda safe and still and quiet in a garden that never ended. But magic can't bury love forever. One evening, Gerda wandered into the sunflower patch. Staring at their golden heads, one of them turned and whispered, "We face the sun because we remember. Do you remember, little girl?" Like a splash of cold water, memory returned. Kai, the sleigh, the snow queen, tears filled her eyes. She ran from the garden, past the herbs, past the copper pot, past the witches reaching hands and back to the river's edge. But the boat was gone. No matter, Gerda pressed forward. Walking into the dusk, the wind rustled her hair, and the flowers left behind bent their heads in goodbye. The spell was broken. Her heart beat louder than ever. The road ahead stretched long and winding, but love had woken again, and nothing, not even enchantment, could keep Gerda from her journey. Now, asterisk. The sky was turning silver when Gerda stumbled into a thick forest. The trees whispered secrets to the wind, and the path beneath her feet felt like it had been waiting just for her. Her feet were sore, her dress torn from thorns, but her spirit was glowing with purpose. That's when she heard it, a voice, scratchy and clever. "Lost, are we?" Gerda turned and saw a large black crow hopping from branch to branch. He wore a monocolyas, truly, and had the air of someone very important and slightly dramatic. "I'm looking for a boy," Gerda said, brushing dirt off her dress. "His name is Kai." The crow tilted his head. "Ah, a boy. Yes, there's a boy in the palace not far from here. A clever one, talks little, stares a lot, sounds Snow Queen. Why, no." Gerda's heart leaped. "Can you take me to him?" "Well," the crow preened his feathers. "Technically, palace rules say no visitors, but I do enjoy breaking rules that are silly with a theatrical swoop." The crow led her to a grand palace nestled in moonlight. Towers touched the stars, and soft lights glowed in the windows like sleepy fireflies. "But we must sneak," whispered the crow, leading her through a hidden gate and into a quiet corridor. Inside, everything shimmered gold-framed paintings, velvet curtains, the faint scent of roses and dust. At last, the crow stopped beside a massive door. "He's in there," he whispered, "sleeping, I assume. Go on." Gerda tiptoed in. The room was warm and filled with the soft breathing of someone asleep. She crept closer, close, and there, on the silken bed, lay a boy, golden curls spilling over the pillow, lashes long and peaceful. Her heart clenched. "Kai," she whispered, reaching for his hand. But it wasn't him. This boy was beautiful. Yes, but not her Kai. His hair was the wrong color. His hands were too soft. Her Kai had calluses from snowball fights and ink stains from writing. Poems in the margins of notebooks. tears welled up, not from sadness, but from relief, because her heart still knew, and that meant Kai was still out there. Just then, the boy stirred. A girl beside him, a princess in a nightgown, up, blinking. "Oh," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Who are you?" Gerda explained everything, her journey. The Snow Queen, the spell, the river, the flower witch. The prince and princess listened, wide-eyed and spellbound. Then the princess jumped up. "You're so brave. You came this far for love. That's the best kind of story." She rang a little bell. Servants appeared with warm bread, soft shoes, and a coat lined with silver thread. "You can't walk to the Snow Queen's palace," said the prince, "but we know someone fast enough." And with a wink, the crow returned, now sitting proudly on the back of a sleigh, pulled by a reindeer with a velvet nose and a heart full of courage. Gerda hugged them all, climbed into the sleigh, and with a gust of winter wind, she was off again. Through the snow, through the stars, closer to the north and closer to Kai. The reindeer galloped across the glittering tundra, his hooves thudding softly in the snow. Gerda clutched his neck, her new coat keeping her warm as they crossed frozen rivers and icy plains. The wind howled like ancient spirits, but the stars above twinkled kindly, as if cheering her on. "Are we almost there?" she asked the reindeer. "Closer," he huffed, "but not close. We still have the forest of thieves to pass." "Thieves?" Gerda gulped, and as if summoned by her fear, arrows whizzed through the air. A group of wild robbers leaped from the trees, yelling, laughing, wrapped in fur and wearing mismatched armor. Before Gerda could scream, the sleigh tipped over, and everything went black. When she woke, Gerda found herself in a dim tent that smelled like pine needles, smoke, and something roasting. She sat up, her arms and legs tied loosely with soft ropes. Standing nearby was a girl with tangled hair, sharp eyes, and an owl perched on her shoulder. She looked about Gerda's age, but fiercer, like she'd wrestled bears and won. "Hello," the girl said, holding a roasted chestnut. "You're not crying. I like that." "I'm not afraid of you," Gerda said, which was a bit of a lie, but brave girls are often scared and still speak strong. The girl grinned. "Good. I'm the little robber girl. And you? What are you doing out here on a flying reindeer?" Gerda told her story again, and to her surprise, the little robber girl listened without interrupting, eyes wide with wonder. "So let me get this straight," she said, pacing. "Your best friend's been taken by a snow sorceress with ice magic, and you've been crossing the world to save him by foot, boat, crow, and now reindeer." Gerda nodded. "That is amazing." The little robber girl clapped her hands. "You're like a hero in those old stories. But real," Gerda blinked. "You're not going to keep me prisoner." The girl laughed so loud, the owl fluffed up. "Why would I? You're on a quest, a real one. Besides, I'm bored to death here." She leaned in closer. "I'll help you. I've got maps, a compass, and that reindeer. He likes me best, but only if you promise. When this is all over, You come back and tell me everything." Gerda smiled. "Deal." That night, the two girls sat by the fire, sharing nuts and apples, talking about dreams and dangers. The little robber girl showed Gerda a hidden dagger she kept in her boot. Gerda showed her the locket with Kai's picture inside. By morning, the ropes were gone, replaced by a warm hug and a new pack full of supplies. The little robber girl led the reindeer out and whispered in his ear, "Take care of her, or I'll track you down." And so Gerda rode north again, heart full of friendship, bravery, and a new fire inside her. Snowflakes danced like tiny stars, and somewhere far ahead, deep in the kingdom of Ice-Kai, was waiting. The reindeer trotted slower now, his breath forming soft clouds in the freezing air. The world around Gerda had gone silent, like it was holding its breath. No birds, no wind, just endless white, stretching into the sky like a dream made of snow. In the distance, shimmering like a mirage, rose the Snow Queen's palace. It wasn't a cozy cottage or a glittering castle. No, this was something otherworldly, a vast structure made entirely of ice, jagged towers, frozen archways, and staircases that glowed with a blue light from within. It pulsed with cold. Ancient and powerful, the reindeer stopped at the edge of the frozen lake surrounding it. "This is as far as I go," he said. "The air bites too deep here." Gerda hugged him tightly. "Thank you for everything." She stepped onto the ice, her boots slipping slightly as she walked toward the palace. Snowflakes swirled, shaping themselves into strange creatures, wolves, crows, icy serpents, but none of them touched her. Why? Because Gerda's love, determination, and kindness radiated like a flame. The snow felt it. The magic recognized it. Inside, the palace was silent. The walls sparkled like diamond, but it was cold. So cold, it made her bones ache and her breath come out in tiny whimpers. And thereon, a grand, icy throne sat Kai. But he wasn't Kai anymore. He was pale, glassy-eyed, and emotionless, placing pieces of icy shards into a strange puzzle on the floor. They shimmered and reflected light, but no matter how he arranged them, the pattern never formed. Gerda ran forward. "Kai?" He didn't flinch. "It's me, Gerda. I came for you. Still nothing." She dropped to her knees beside him, heart pounding. He looked like a statue. A single tear slid down her cheek, landing on his hand, and then crack, a faint line appeared in the shard he held. Another tear fell, and another, each one warmer than the last, as if her very love was melting the curse. Kai blinked once, twice, his lips trembled. Gerda, her sob, turned into a laugh. "Yes, it's me." He looked down at the broken puzzle, the melting shards, the shimmer of tears on the icy floor. Confusion flooded his face, then horror. "I couldn't feel anything. I thought I was dreaming. I'm so cold." Gerda wrapped her arms around him. "You're safe now. You're coming home." At that moment, the wind howled louder than before, the palace trembled, the Snow Queen's magic losing griplet. But Gerda didn't care. The storm couldn't touch them. Kai and Gerda stood, hand in hand, and turned away from the throne of ice, the puzzle, left unfinished because they'd already solved the most important one, finding each other again. The snow whispered around them as Kai and Gerda stepped out of the palace. Hand in hand, the wind, once sharp and cruel, now swirled gently like soft music. The Snow Queen's spell had shattered, and with it, the eternal winter began to retreat. Their footsteps on the ice no longer echoed with loneliness. As they crossed the frozen lake, the path seemed to light up before them. The same lake that had once been a barrier now felt like a gentle bridge. Nature herself had shifted, like the land was happy too, rejoicing in their reunion. The reindeer was waiting at the edge of the forest, eyes twinkling. "I knew you'd do it, little girl," he said. Gerda smiled. "I had help from many friends." With Kai safely nestled beside her, they began the ride home. Snow gave way to thawing rivers. Icy branches began to drip with water. Tiny buds peeked through the frost, as if the world had been holding its breath, waiting for this exact moment to begin healing. As they passed the wise old Lapland woman's hut, she stood at the door, smiling without a word. She simply nodded, as if saying, "All is as it should be." And far off, the old Finnish woman stirred her pot of herbs and whispered to the fire, "Love always melts the coldest curse." Days passed, then weeks. They returned the same way they'd come, through meadows, along rivers, through villages where stories of the Snow Queen faded like snowflakes on windows. One morning, they reached the garden where it had all begun. Gerda stopped, so did Kai. The roses were blooming again, big, red, fragrant, full of life. The same roses they used to care for. Before the mirror shards, before the reindeer rides, before icy palaces and magical crows, they stood silently for a moment. Then Kai turned to her. "I remember it all now," he said quietly. "The cold, the puzzle, the emptiness." Gerda touched his hand gently. "And I remember how brave you were." Kai looked at her with tear-filled eyes. "I think you were the brave one," she smiled. "Maybe we both were." They sat by the roses, and, for the first time in what felt like forever, they laughed. A quiet, heart-deep laugh that comes only when peace finally finds its way home. As evening fell, the garden glowed golden. Fireflies danced lazily in the warm air. A breeze rustled through the leaves, not cold, not biting, just soft and alive. They didn't need to speak anymore. The silence between them was full of warmth, memories, magic. They had returned not as the same children, but as wiser souls who had faced loss, loneliness, and ice, and emerged whole. And somewhere, deep in the forest, in the place where the Snow Queen's palace once stood, nothing remained but a gentle mist, a peaceful quiet, as if the land itself had let go. And high above, the stars twinkled softly, watching over them. Home again, together, at last.